Fatal Expectations, The Shocking Jennifer Pan Case. Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. Welcome to this episode of 22 Crime, where we delve deep into the chilling and complex case of Jennifer Pan, a story that not only shocked a quiet suburban community in Ontario, Canada, but also gripped the entire nation with its harrowing and disturbing details. Jennifer Pan seemed like an ordinary young woman living in the peaceful town of Markham, Ontario. As the daughter of hard-working Vietnamese immigrants, she was raised in a household defined by high expectations and relentless discipline. On the surface, Jennifer's life appeared to be a model of academic success and filial devotion. But beneath this facade of normalcy, a dark and twisted reality was festering, a reality that would ultimately lead to a devastating and deadly home invasion. On the night of November 8, 2010, the Pan family home became the scene of a brutal crime. What initially seemed like a random act of violence by masked intruders soon unraveled into something far more sinister. The attack claimed the life of Jennifer's mother, Big Ha Pan, and left her father, Hui Pan, severely injured. As investigators began to dig deeper, the true horror of that night emerged, unveiling a story of deception, desperation, and betrayal that no one could have imagined. In today's episode, we will dissect the many layers of Jennifer Pan's life and the heinous crime she orchestrated. We'll start by exploring her background, how the immense pressure from her family molded her into someone who felt trapped and desperate enough to take extreme measures. Then we'll unravel the events leading up to the crime, focusing on the meticulous planning that Jennifer undertook to orchestrate an attack that would forever fracture her family. A crucial part of our discussion will center on the intense interrogation that led to Jennifer's eventual confession. We'll analyze the psychological tactics employed by detectives, how these methods impacted Jennifer, and how they were pivotal in revealing the truth. Through this journey, we aim to understand the complex interplay of family dynamics, psychological pressure, and criminal behavior that culminated in one of the most unsettling cases in Canadian history. Join us as we peel back the layers of this tragic tale, shedding light on the dark path Jennifer Pan chose and the catastrophic consequences of her decisions. Jennifer Pan was born on December 29, 1986, in Markham, Ontario, Canada, to Big Ha and Hui Pan, Vietnamese refugees who had fled the turmoil of their homeland in the late 1970s. Their journey to Canada was a harrowing one, marked by immense hardship and sacrifice. For the Pan family, settling in Markham, a suburban community with a large immigrant population, was the culmination of their dreams, a place where they could finally build a better life. Hui Pan, Jennifer's father, was a man shaped by struggle. Born and raised in Vietnam, he had endured the hardships of life in a war-torn country before making the arduous journey to Canada. Once in Ontario, Hui found work as a factory worker, dedicating himself to providing for his family. His past, marked by resilience and perseverance, fueled his belief in the importance of discipline and hard work as the cornerstones of a successful life. Big Ha Pan, Jennifer's mother, shared a similar history of struggle. Like Hui, Big had faced the difficulties of life in Vietnam before immigrating to Canada. She worked as a nurse, embodying the same relentless work ethic and high expectations that defined the Pan family. Big was a strict disciplinarian, deeply involved in every aspect of her children's lives, particularly Jennifer's. She believed in the value of hard work and discipline, expecting nothing less than perfection from her daughter. The Pan parents were united in their belief that education was the key to success. They envisioned a future for their children that was vastly different from the hardships they had endured, a future where Jennifer and her younger brother, Felix, would achieve the heights of success that had been out of reach for them. Jennifer grew up in an environment where excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. The Pan family adhered to what is often referred to as tiger parenting, a strict and demanding approach characterized by high expectations, rigorous discipline, and an unwavering focus on academic and extracurricular success. For Hui and Bick, this parenting style was a natural extension of their immigrant experience, a way to ensure that their children would never have to endure the same hardships they had faced. Academic excellence was at the forefront of these expectations. Jennifer's parents, particularly her mother, placed extraordinary emphasis on her academic performance. Mediocrity was not an option. Anything less than perfection was met with severe reprimands. Jennifer's report cards were closely scrutinized, and her achievements were viewed as a direct reflection of her parents' values and sacrifices. This pressure to succeed began in her earliest school days and only intensified as she grew older. From a young age, Jennifer was steered towards a career in medicine, a field her parents regarded as the pinnacle of success. Becoming a doctor wasn't just about the profession's prestige, it represented financial security, social respect, and the ultimate realization of her parents' dreams. Throughout high school, Jennifer maintained the appearance of working towards this goal. She enrolled in advanced science courses, participated in extracurricular activities that would bolster her medical school applications, and spoke often of her ambition to become a doctor. However, beneath the surface, Jennifer struggled. The demanding coursework, particularly in subjects like chemistry and biology, proved to be challenging, and as the pressure mounted, her grades began to slip. The dream of becoming a doctor started to feel increasingly out of reach. As Jennifer's struggles in her science courses intensified, she realized that meeting her parents' expectations of becoming a doctor was becoming unattainable. To avoid the crushing disappointment she feared and to manage her parents' expectations, Jennifer decided to shift her focus to a different, yet still respected field, pharmacy. Pharmacy seemed like a more achievable goal, one that would still meet her parents' approval while lowering the academic bar slightly. Jennifer fabricated a story that she had been accepted into the pharmacology program at Ryerson University in Toronto, maintaining the illusion of success while secretly lowering her own expectations. The gap between Jennifer's actual academic performance and her parents' expectations widened as she neared the end of high school. The turning point came when she failed a crucial calculus course, a requirement for graduation. This failure meant that Jennifer did not have enough credits to earn her high school diploma, a devastating reality that would have shattered her parents' dreams and brought intense shame upon the family. Rather than face their disappointment, Jennifer chose to deceive them. She began by forging her report card, altering the failing grades to reflect the high marks her parents expected. This initial act of forgery marked the beginning of a much larger web of lies that Jennifer would weave over the coming years. When it came time to apply for university, Jennifer continued her deception by fabricating acceptance letters from several universities, including the prestigious University of Toronto and later, Ryerson University. These forged documents convinced her parents that she had been accepted into the pharmacology program, keeping the dream of her success alive. To maintain the charade, Jennifer went to extraordinary lengths. She created fake schedules with course names, times, and even professors' names, which she showed to her parents as proof of her university attendance. She also forged emails and other communications from the university to further convince her parents of her academic progress. Jennifer's deception didn't end with forged acceptance letters and fake schedules. To fully convince her parents that she was attending university, Jennifer pretended to go to classes every day. She would leave the house dressed as if she were going to school, but instead, she spent her days in libraries, cafes, or with friends, crafting the illusion of a busy student life. To avoid financial scrutiny, Jennifer lied about receiving scholarships and awards, claiming these covered her tuition costs. As graduation approached, Jennifer went as far as forging a university diploma, complete with the university seal and signatures, to solidify her deception. During high school, Jennifer entered into a secret relationship with Daniel Wong, a fellow student at Mary Ward Catholic Secondary School. Like Jennifer, Daniel was under significant pressure to succeed, but he was more rebellious and less inclined to conform to his parents' expectations. Daniel was studying engineering, a demanding field that aligned with the high expectations often placed on children of immigrant families. However, Daniel's defiance against these expectations was appealing to Jennifer, who found solace in his free-spirited nature. Their relationship was a significant part of Jennifer's life, offering her an escape from the pressures of her academic responsibilities and the suffocating expectations at home. However, it was also something Jennifer knew her parents would never approve of. To maintain the relationship, she had to keep it hidden, adding another layer to her already complicated life. As their relationship deepened, Jennifer's double life became more pronounced. On the surface, she continued to present herself as the obedient, hardworking daughter, while in reality she was skipping classes, spending time with Daniel, and engaging in activities that were far removed from the life her parents had envisioned for her. Living a double life took a significant toll on Jennifer. The constant pressure to maintain the charade, coupled with the fear of being discovered, left her in a state of perpetual anxiety. She became increasingly isolated, avoiding situations where her lies might be exposed. Her relationship with her parents, once central to her life, grew strained as she struggled to live up to their impossible expectations. The burden of deception weighed heavily on Jennifer. The fear of disappointing her parents and the shame of her failures drove her to believe that there was no way out of the situation she had created. She was trapped in a web of lies, and with each passing year, the lies became more difficult to sustain. The Pan family's dynamics were a complex interplay of cultural expectations, strict discipline, and high-pressure parenting. Hui and Big Pan were determined to see their children succeed, believing that their sacrifices would be justified through Jennifer and Felix's accomplishments. However, this created an environment where failure was not an option, and where love and approval were conditional upon meeting exceedingly high standards. Hui Pan's approach to parenting was strict and uncompromising. He demanded excellence in all aspects of Jennifer's life, believing that discipline and hard work were essential to her success. His stern demeanor and high expectations left Jennifer with little room for failure, and she feared his disappointment above all else. This fear drove her to hide her struggles from him, leading to the web of lies that would eventually spiral out of control. Big Ha Pan was equally strict and deeply involved in Jennifer's life, monitoring her academic progress and pushing her to achieve more. Big believed in the importance of hard work and discipline, and she expected nothing less than perfection from her daughter. The cultural expectations that Big brought from Vietnam added another layer of pressure, as she expected Jennifer to embody traditional values of family honor and obedience. Felix Pan, Jennifer's younger brother, played a quieter yet significant role in the family dynamic. While the spotlight was often on Jennifer due to the immense pressure from their parents, Felix also carried the weight of his family's expectations, though he navigated these pressures in his own way. He was known for his academic diligence and was drawn to engineering, a field that matched his interest in mathematics and problem-solving. Felix admired Jennifer and looked up to her as a role model, but he was largely unaware of the extent of the pressure she was under, or the elaborate deception she had constructed. As Jennifer became more entangled in her web of lies, her relationship with Felix began to distance. Felix was preoccupied with his studies and future career, largely insulated from Jennifer's struggles. Their bond, though strong in childhood, became strained as Jennifer's life became more consumed by the deception she was living. Jennifer, caught between her parents' expectations and her own struggles, found herself living a double life that would ultimately lead to tragic consequences. The immense pressure to succeed, coupled with the rigid expectations of her parents, left her feeling isolated, desperate, and incapable of escaping the web of lies she had spun. By 2010, Jennifer Pan's carefully constructed life of lies was unraveling. The immense pressure to meet her parents' high expectations had led her down a path of deceit, culminating in a series of fabricated academic achievements and a hidden romantic relationship with Daniel Wong. When her father, Hui Pan, discovered the truth about her academic failures, Jennifer's world began to collapse. Furious and feeling betrayed, Hui confined Jennifer to the house, severely restricting her social life and forbidding her from seeing Daniel. Trapped and desperate, Jennifer became convinced that the only way to escape her parents' control was to eliminate them. Jennifer's motives for the crime were rooted in both financial and emotional desperation. She knew that upon her parents' death, she stood to inherit a significant sum of money, enough to live independently and maintain her relationship with Daniel without her parents' interference. The promise of financial freedom and an escape from her parents' oppressive control became the driving forces behind her deadly plan. Jennifer quickly realized she couldn't carry out the crime alone. She turned to the one person she trusted completely, Daniel Wong. Fully aware of Jennifer's strained relationship with her parents, Daniel agreed to help her. Together, they began plotting the murder of Big Ha and Hui Pan. To execute their plan, Daniel introduced Jennifer to Linford homeboy Crawford, a man with a criminal background known for his involvement in illegal activities. Crawford agreed to carry out the murders for a fee. The plan was to stage the crime as a home invasion gone wrong, removing any suspicion from Jennifer and allowing her to inherit her parents' estate. Jennifer, Daniel, and Crawford began communicating regularly, meticulously planning the logistics of the crime. The plan was straightforward. Crawford and his accomplices would break into the Pan family home, kill Jennifer's parents, and stage the scene to look like a robbery. Jennifer would be spared, maintaining her innocence and securing her future. In the summer of 2010, Jennifer made her first attempt to have her father killed. She approached a high school friend, Andrew Montemayor, who had previously boasted about robbing people at knife point. Jennifer asked him to kill her father in an ambush at his workplace parking lot. However, Montemayor refused but introduced her to Ricardo Duncan, another acquaintance with a criminal background. Jennifer offered Duncan $1,500 to kill her father, but the plan quickly fell apart. Duncan took the money but never followed through with the murder, leaving Jennifer frustrated and more desperate than ever. The failure of this attempt pushed Jennifer back into Daniel's arms, leading to the introduction of Linford Crawford and setting the stage for the final, deadly plan. The final plan was set in motion on November 8, 2010. Jennifer coordinated with Daniel Wong and Linford Crawford to ensure every detail was in place. That night, Jennifer left the front door of her family home unlocked, allowing Crawford and his accomplices, David Movaganam and Eric Carty, easy access. She knew her parents' routine and ensured they would be home invulnerable. At around 10 p.m., the intruders entered the Pan family home. They immediately headed to the master bedroom, where they found Hui and Bick. The intruders dragged Bick downstairs to the basement while Hui was forced at gunpoint to open the family's safe, which held a modest amount of cash. After looting the safe, they shot Bick execution style, killing her instantly. Hui was also shot multiple times, including a shot to the face. Miraculously, he survived, managing to crawl out of the house to a neighbor's home, where he was able to call for help. During the attack, Jennifer was tied up in her bedroom, left unharmed as planned. She made a 911 call, feigning hysteria and terror, claiming that her home had been invaded and her parents attacked. However, the controlled tone of her voice and the inconsistencies in her story raised suspicions with the police. The police responded quickly to Jennifer's 911 call, arriving at the scene within minutes. They found Big Pan dead in the basement and Hui Pan barely alive on the front lawn. Initially, Jennifer was treated as the sole survivor and victim of a horrific home invasion. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in her story emerged, raising doubts about her version of events. Jennifer's carefully orchestrated plan began to unravel when her father, Hui, despite his severe injuries, regained consciousness. He provided a statement to the police that contradicted Jennifer's account of the night. Hui's testimony, combined with the evidence collected by investigators, pointed to Jennifer's involvement in the crime. In the days following the attack, Jennifer was subjected to intense police interrogation. Detectives employed a variety of psychological tactics to break down her story. Under pressure, Jennifer eventually confessed to her role in planning the murders. Her confession was detailed and damning, revealing how she had orchestrated the entire crime with the help of her boyfriend and hired hitmen. Just hours after the brutal attack on her family, Jennifer Pan found herself seated in a stark interrogation room on the morning of November 9, 2010. The room's sterile environment contrasted sharply with the chaos that had unfolded the night before. Detective Tom O'Brien, a seasoned investigator known for his psychological acumen, was assigned to lead the interrogation. O'Brien was a master of the subtle art of extraction. His methods were a blend of empathy and manipulation, designed to unearth the truth from even the most guarded of suspects. Detective O'Brien's approach was methodical. He understood that Jennifer, who was potentially hiding a deep secret, needed to feel safe enough to let her guard down. To achieve this, O'Brien crafted an environment that appeared non-threatening, speaking to Jennifer in a calm, almost fatherly tone. He presented himself as an ally, someone who was there to help her through the traumatic events she had supposedly witnessed. This was a classic, good cop strategy, but O'Brien employed it with a finesse that made it particularly effective. His goal was to build rapport, to make Jennifer feel that she could trust him, even as he subtly guided her towards incriminating herself. By framing his questions gently and validating her emotions, O'Brien sought to lower her defenses, making it easier to identify inconsistencies in her story. O'Brien's first tactic was to let Jennifer talk. He asked her open-ended questions, allowing her to narrate her version of the events with minimal interruption. This approach served two purposes. It made Jennifer feel heard, and it provided O'Brien with a wealth of information to dissect later. As Jennifer spoke, O'Brien nodded sympathetically, offering comments like, "That must have been terrifying for you," and "I can't imagine how hard this is." These phrases were carefully chosen to create an emotional bond, making Jennifer feel that O'Brien was on her side. The detective's empathy was genuine enough to be convincing, but it was also a tool, a way to make Jennifer comfortable enough to continue talking, even when her story began to falter. O'Brien also employed the technique of cognitive interviewing, asking Jennifer to recount the events in reverse order. This method, known for disrupting rehearsed narratives, often leads to inconsistencies that can reveal the truth. Jennifer's account began to show signs of strain under this psychological pressure. Despite O'Brien's careful strategy, the early stages of the interrogation were challenging. Jennifer's behavior oscillated between visible distress and unnatural calmness. Her nervousness seemed to stem not just from the trauma of the previous night, but from something deeper, perhaps the fear of being caught in her web of lies. As Jennifer recounted her version of the events, inconsistencies began to emerge. She claimed to have been tied up by the intruders, yet her description of how she managed to call 911 suggested she had more mobility than someone who was tightly bound. Her narrative about the timing of events was disjointed, and her emotions appeared oddly disconnected from the horrific nature of the crime she described. Jennifer's demeanor was particularly telling. At moments where genuine distress would have been expected, she was curiously composed. Her ability to calmly describe certain details, especially those involving the attack, contrasted sharply with her occasional displays of feigned panic. This inconsistent emotional response did not align with the typical behavior of a trauma victim, further raising O'Brien's suspicions. When Jennifer began recounting the events of the night, she portrayed herself as a terrified victim caught in a random home invasion. According to her, masked intruders had violently entered the house, attacked her parents, and left her helplessly tied up. She claimed to have freed herself just enough to reach her phone and call 911 after the intruders fled. However, her story was disjointed, and certain details seemed rehearsed, as if she had gone over them repeatedly in her mind before speaking to the police. As Jennifer continued, her narrative began to crumble. O'Brien and his team noted several inconsistencies, particularly regarding the timing of events and her actions during the attack. For instance, Jennifer mentioned that the intruders spoke in a language she didn't understand, yet she later provided details that implied she had comprehended parts of their conversation. Her description of how she managed to call 911 while supposedly bound was another red flag that did not align with the physical evidence at the scene. These discrepancies, coupled with Jennifer's fluctuating emotional responses, made O'Brien increasingly suspicious. He began to press her on specific points, asking her to clarify details and recount certain moments multiple times. Each retelling provided new variations in her story, further undermining her credibility. As the interrogation progressed, O'Brien and his team focused on several key discrepancies that began to unravel Jennifer's story. One of the most glaring inconsistencies was her account of how she was tied up. Initially, Jennifer described herself as tightly bound and immobilized, yet when explaining how she managed to call 911, she suggested she had enough freedom of movement to reach the phone. This contradiction led detectives to question whether she had been tied up at all, or if the scene had been staged to support her story. Moreover, when asked for specifics about the intruders, Jennifer became evasive. Her descriptions of their appearances and actions were vague and inconsistent, leading investigators to suspect she was either withholding information or fabricating details on the spot. The timeline she provided also failed to align with the forensic evidence. For example, the time she claimed the intruders left the house did not match the time of the gunshots as determined by investigators. Her account of the duration of the ordeal seemed exaggerated when compared to the evidence collected at the scene. Jennifer's behavior during and after the attack raised additional questions. Detectives found it odd that despite claiming to be in fear for her life, she recalled minute details about the crime scene, details that seemed irrelevant or out of place given the chaos she described. Her detailed knowledge of the crime scene, including the placement of objects and the state of the house, suggested she had seen more of the crime than she should have if she had been incapacitated during the attack. These discrepancies were critical in shifting the investigation's focus. Initially seen as a victim, Jennifer's inconsistent statements and unusual behavior gradually led detectives to consider the possibility that she was more involved in the crime than she had initially let on. As the interrogation wore on, O'Brien's strategy of psychological pressure, combined with the weight of Jennifer's own contradictions, began to take its toll. The careful facade she had constructed was starting to crack. Detectives, armed with her shifting story and the mounting inconsistencies, were closing in on the truth. It was only a matter of time before Jennifer's web of lies would unravel completely, leading to a dramatic confession that would change everything. As Jennifer Pan sat in the interrogation room, she was unaware that she was about to face a carefully orchestrated psychological battle. The detectives, seasoned in the art of interrogation, were not just seeking answers, they were methodically working to dismantle Jennifer's psychological defenses. The goal was not only to extract the truth, but to do so in a way that left her with no option but to confess. One of the most effective techniques employed by the detectives was inducing psychological fatigue. Jennifer was subjected to prolonged interrogation sessions that often stretched for hours with minimal breaks. This tactic aimed to exhaust her mentally and physically, making it increasingly difficult for her to maintain the complex web of lies she had spun. As the hours wore on, the relentless questioning began to take its toll. Fatigue is a powerful tool in interrogation, and as Jennifer became more tired, her cognitive ability started to falter. The detectives exploited this vulnerability, knowing that a fatigued mind is more prone to errors, more suggestible, and less capable of sustaining deception. Throughout these extended sessions, Jennifer was bombarded with questions, many of which were repeated but phrased differently each time. This repetition served to test the consistency of her story, increasing the cognitive load and creating a sense of inescapability. Jennifer was forced to revisit her narrative repeatedly, making it more likely that she would inadvertently reveal inconsistencies or contradictions. As her fatigue deepened, Jennifer's ability to think critically and respond coherently began to erode, leaving her more susceptible to the other psychological tactics the detectives had in store. While fatigue was one approach, Detective Tom O'Brien also employed empathy as a psychological tool, masterfully manipulating Jennifer's emotions. O'Brien was skilled in presenting himself as a sympathetic figure, someone who understood the immense pressure she was under, and who genuinely wanted to help her. This was a key part of the strategy to break down Jennifer's defenses. O'Brien's empathetic demeanor was not just a facade, it was a calculated move to make Jennifer feel understood and supported. He would often interject the interrogation with statements like, "I know this must be incredibly hard for you," or, "You've been through so much, we just want to help you get through this." These comments were designed to create a false sense of security, making Jennifer believe that O'Brien was on her side and that confessing might relieve her of her burden. This approach was part of a broader psychological tactic known as good cop, bad cop, though in Jennifer's case the shift between empathy and confrontation was more nuanced. O'Brien's gentle, understanding demeanor was strategically contrasted with moments of direct confrontation, creating a psychological push and pull that left Jennifer emotionally unbalanced. The goal was to make her believe that confessing would not only bring her relief, but might also earn her sympathy and leniency from the detective. As the psychological pressure mounted, the detectives introduced a more aggressive tactic, the presentation of fabricated evidence. Jennifer was led to believe that the police had irrefutable proof of her involvement in the crime, even when such evidence did not exist. This strategy was designed to create a sense of inevitability, that her lies were unraveling and that her only way out was to confess. The detectives implied that they had found forensic evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, that contradicted her version of events. They also suggested that there were witnesses or accomplices who had already confessed and implicated her as the mastermind behind the attack. This tactic cornered Jennifer, making her feel as though the walls were closing in on her. Believing that the evidence against her was overwhelming put Jennifer under immense psychological pressure. She was forced to consider whether continuing to lie would result in harsher consequences later, or if confessing might offer her a chance at a more lenient outcome. The detectives knew they were walking a fine line between legal interrogation and coercion, but in Jennifer's case, the risk was calculated, and it paid off. The detectives also relied heavily on the power of repetition to create cognitive dissonance, a psychological state where conflicting beliefs or information caused discomfort and confusion. By repeatedly asking Jennifer to recount the events of the night and subtly altering their questions each time, the detectives aimed to disrupt her narrative and induce a sense of self-doubt. Each time Jennifer was asked to retell her story, the detectives introduced new elements or challenged her with fabricated evidence. This strategy created discrepancies in her narrative, making it increasingly difficult for her to reconcile her story with the growing inconsistencies. The psychological strain of holding on to her lies, coupled with the detective's relentless questioning, began to erode Jennifer's confidence in her own narrative. Cognitive dissonance is particularly effective in breaking down a suspect's resistance because it creates internal psychological pressure. Jennifer, already exhausted and emotionally strained, found it harder and harder to maintain her false story. The more the detectives pushed, the more her story began to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. Jennifer Pan entered the interrogation room with a carefully constructed emotional facade, one designed to portray her as a terrified victim of a brutal home invasion. Initially, she maintained a controlled demeanor, recounting the events with a mix of calmness and measured distress. This composure seemed calculated to evoke sympathy, but it quickly became apparent that her emotional responses were inconsistent with the gravity of the situation she described. As the questioning intensified, Jennifer's emotional responses began to fluctuate. At times, she was unnervingly calm when discussing horrific details, only to suddenly display bursts of emotion when she sensed the need to appear more vulnerable or sympathetic. These inconsistencies did not go unnoticed by the detectives, who saw them as telltale signs that Jennifer was struggling to maintain her story under the mounting psychological pressure. The psychological pressure eventually began to wear down Jennifer's controlled facade. As the hours of interrogation stretched on, the combined effects of fatigue, cognitive dissonance, and the repeated confrontations took a significant toll on her mental and emotional state. The once composed and calculated demeanor began to give way to signs of genuine distress. Jennifer's emotional strain became increasingly evident as the detectives intensified their efforts. Her responses grew more erratic. She hesitated more often, struggled to maintain eye contact, and exhibited physical signs of stress, such as fidgeting and nervous tics. The detectives observed these signs closely, knowing that Jennifer was nearing a breaking point. Finally, the psychological and emotional manipulation reached its peak. Overwhelmed by the orchestrated fatigue, the manipulation of evidence, and the relentless questioning, Jennifer's defenses crumbled. The controlled persona she had maintained for so long was replaced by visible distress. Tears flowed more freely, and her voice wavered as she spoke. This was the moment the detectives had been working toward. Jennifer was now emotionally and psychologically exhausted, with little strength left to continue her charade. In this vulnerable state, Jennifer began to concede. Her confessions came in fragments, initially hesitant and incomplete, but gradually growing in detail as the reality of her situation set in. The psychological manipulation had worked. Jennifer, overwhelmed and defeated, had reached the point where confession seemed like the only option left. Under the relentless psychological pressure from the detectives, Jennifer Pan's once steadfast resolve began to erode. The subtle shifts in her demeanor soon became more pronounced as she struggled to maintain her fabricated story in the face of mounting, albeit false, evidence. What began as a firm insistence on her innocence slowly gave way to uncertainty and doubt. At first, Jennifer clung to her story, attempting to weather the increasingly aggressive questioning. But as the detectives continued to highlight the inconsistencies in her narrative and presented her with fabricated evidence, the cracks in her facade widened. Her responses became less certain, her voice began to waver, and the confident composure she had initially displayed started to falter. This gradual breakdown was exactly what the detectives had aimed for. With each passing hour, Jennifer's defenses weakened, leading her to make small admissions, minor concessions that chipped away at her story. These admissions were not outright confessions, but they were significant nonetheless. She might admit to being aware of the crime's planning or acknowledge having discussed certain details with those involved, yet she stopped short of admitting direct involvement. These incremental acknowledgments were the first signs of Jennifer's crumbling resolve. The psychological and emotional toll on Jennifer during this phase was immense. As the detectives intensified their confrontational approach, Jennifer's emotional responses became more erratic. The calm and calculated demeanor she had initially displayed began to give way to visible signs of distress. The effort to maintain her innocence against the growing pressure was becoming too much for her to bear. Jennifer's body language betrayed her inner turmoil. She became more defensive, often crossing her arms, fidgeting nervously, and avoiding eye contact. Her once clear and composed speech turned hesitant and faltering. Her voice occasionally broke as she struggled to keep her story intact. The emotional strain was evident, tears became more frequent, and her attempts to maintain control over her emotions were increasingly futile. The detectives, keenly observing these signs, capitalized on Jennifer's vulnerability. They expressed sympathy, gently suggesting that a confession might bring her relief, framing it as an escape from the psychological burden she was carrying. The combination of empathy and pressure pushed Jennifer further toward the breaking point, making her more susceptible to the idea that confession was her only way out. As the interrogation reached its climax, the detectives, sensing Jennifer's weakening defenses, pressed her for a full admission of guilt. The cumulative effects of fatigue, emotional strain, and relentless pressure finally brought Jennifer to a critical breaking point. Realizing that her story was no longer tenable, she began to offer a more detailed account of her involvement in the crime. This turning point was not a sudden revelation but a gradual unraveling. Cornered by the detectives' probing questions and the weight of the fabricated evidence, Jennifer first admitted to peripheral involvement, acknowledging that she knew something might happen that night. From there, the admissions became more direct, until she ultimately conceded that she had orchestrated the entire event. The detectives skillfully guided her through this process, beginning with less incriminating questions and gradually steering her towards a full confession. They might have asked, "Were you aware that something might happen that night?" To which Jennifer, now emotionally exhausted and psychologically cornered, responded affirmatively. Each small admission brought her closer to revealing the full extent of her role in the crime. Once Jennifer began to confess, the detectives encouraged her to divulge every detail. They asked her to recount the entire process, from the conception of the plan to the execution of the crime. Jennifer, now fully aware of the gravity of her situation, began to outline the chilling details of how she had orchestrated the attack on her parents. In her confession, Jennifer revealed the meticulous planning that had gone into the crime. She spoke of feeling trapped by her parents' strict expectations and how this led her to desperate measures. Her need for freedom, both emotionally and financially, drove her to devise a plan that would eliminate her parents and secure her independence. Jennifer detailed how she had reached out to individuals capable of carrying out the attack, coordinating the logistics to ensure that the crime would appear as a botched home invasion. She explained the specific roles of her co-conspirators, the discussions they had, and how she had orchestrated the events to minimize suspicion on herself. Her confession included disturbing details about how she had left the door unlocked to grant the attackers easy access, how she had instructed them on what to do once inside, and how she had staged her own involvement to appear as a victim rather than the mastermind. These revelations not only provided the detectives with the evidence they needed to secure a conviction, but also painted a portrait of a calculated and premeditated crime, driven by deep emotional and psychological turmoil. Jennifer Pan's confession, extracted after hours of intense interrogation, marked the beginning of a dramatic turn in the case. On November 22, 2010, just days after her confession, the York Regional Police made their move, formally arresting Jennifer at her family home in Markham, Ontario. The early morning arrest was conducted with caution, given the high-profile nature of the case. As law enforcement officers arrived, the gravity of the situation began to sink in for Jennifer. The 2-week investigation, which had rapidly shifted from a presumed home invasion to a premeditated murder, had finally reached its critical juncture. Jennifer faced several severe charges following her arrest, each reflecting the calculated nature of her crimes. She was charged with first-degree murder for the death of her mother, Big Ha Pan, a charge that underscored the premeditation and intent behind the crime. Additionally, she was charged with attempted murder for the attack on her father, Hui Pan, who miraculously survived despite being shot multiple times. The conspiracy to commit murder charge further highlighted her role in orchestrating the entire plot. Upon her arrest, Jennifer's demeanor shifted from the controlled and emotional state she had maintained during the interrogation to one of near despair. The realization of the full extent of her situation became evident as she offered no resistance and made no attempt to deny her involvement. Resigned to her fate, Jennifer immediately requested legal counsel, indicating her awareness of the severity of the charges she faced. In the days that followed, Jennifer was held in custody, where she reportedly remained mostly quiet, displaying signs of deep psychological distress as she awaited the formal charges and the ensuing legal battle. The trial of Jennifer Pan and her co-conspirators began on March 19, 2014, at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice in Newmarket. The case, presided over by Justice Carrie Boswell, was one of the most anticipated trials in recent Canadian history, drawing intense media scrutiny. Alongside Jennifer, her former boyfriend Daniel Wong, and 2 other men, Linford Crawford and David Mulvaganam, were also on trial. Each of them faced charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecution's case rested heavily on Jennifer's confession, supported by forensic evidence and the testimony of key witnesses. Crown Attorney Jennifer Halajian delivered the opening statement, presenting a chilling narrative of a crime driven by desperation and a desire to escape parental control. She detailed how Jennifer, overwhelmed by the pressure to succeed and the fear of disappointing her parents, had meticulously planned the murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her father. The prosecution highlighted the premeditated nature of the crime, emphasizing the extensive planning and deliberate steps taken to ensure the attack appeared as a random home invasion. In contrast, the defense, led by Paul Cooper, portrayed Jennifer as a vulnerable young woman who had been manipulated by those around her. They argued that her confession had been obtained under intense psychological pressure, rendering it unreliable. The defense sought to undermine the prosecution's case by challenging the integrity of the investigation and the methods used during the interrogation. They portrayed Jennifer as a pawn, coerced into participating in a crime that spiraled out of her control. One of the most significant pieces of evidence presented by the prosecution was Jennifer Pan's recorded confession. In this recording, Jennifer described in her own words how she had orchestrated the home invasion, detailing her role in planning the attack as a means to free herself from her parents' oppressive control. The jury listened intently as the confession was played in court, providing a first-hand account of Jennifer's involvement. However, the defense countered by arguing that the confession had been coerced under duress, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological effects of prolonged interrogation and the potential for false confessions. The prosecution also presented phone records and digital evidence that painted a damning picture of Jennifer's involvement. These records showed extensive communication between Jennifer, Daniel Wong, and the other co-conspirators in the days and weeks leading up to the attack. The evidence included detailed discussions about the logistics of the crime, payment for the hitmen, and plans to stage the attack as a robbery gone wrong. Internet searches conducted by Jennifer on how to hire a hitman and how to commit a murder without getting caught further illustrated her intent and active role in the crime. A pivotal moment in the trial came when Jennifer's father, Hui Pan, took the stand. Despite the physical and emotional trauma he had endured, Hui delivered a powerful testimony, recounting the night of the attack with harrowing detail. His account of the masked intruders entering the home, tying him up, and shooting him and his wife resonated deeply with the jury. The shock and betrayal he felt upon learning that his own daughter had orchestrated the crime added a profound emotional layer to the trial, serving as a stark reminder of the human cost of Jennifer's actions. The prosecution also relied on the testimonies of co-conspirators who had been approached by Jennifer and Daniel to carry out the hit. These witnesses corroborated the prosecution's narrative, providing details about the planning of the crime and the payment arrangements. Despite the defense's attempts to discredit these witnesses by suggesting they had testified in exchange for leniency, the consistency of their accounts with the digital evidence and Jennifer's confession bolstered their credibility. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the defense focused on two main strategies: discrediting Jennifer's confession and portraying her as a victim of manipulation. They brought in a forensic psychologist to testify about the techniques used during Jennifer's interrogation, arguing that the psychological pressure she had been under could have led to a false confession. The defense pointed out inconsistencies in Jennifer's statements, suggesting that these were the result of coercion rather than an admission of guilt. Additionally, the defense sought to shift some of the blame onto the other defendants, particularly Daniel Wong. They argued that Jennifer, under immense pressure from her parents and emotionally vulnerable, had been manipulated by Daniel and his criminal associates into participating in the plot. The defense claimed that Jennifer had never intended for her parents to be harmed and that the plan had spiraled out of her control. As the trial drew to a close, both sides delivered compelling closing arguments. The prosecution reiterated their position that Jennifer Pan had been the mastermind behind the crime, driven by a desire to escape her parents' control and achieve financial independence. They urged the jury to consider the overwhelming evidence presented, including Jennifer's confession, phone records, and the testimony of co-conspirators, as proof of her guilt. The prosecution also reminded the jury of the devastating impact the crime had on the Pan family, particularly the emotional testimony of Hui Pan. The defense, on the other hand, focused on the theme of manipulation and coercion. They argued that Jennifer had been a pawn in a larger scheme orchestrated by others and that her confession had been coerced under intense psychological pressure. They urged the jury to consider Jennifer's emotional state and the possibility that she had been manipulated into participating in the crime. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict on December 13, 2014. Jennifer Pan was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Her co-defendants, Daniel Wong, Linford Crawford, and David Movaganam, were also found guilty on all counts. The verdict was a significant victory for the prosecution, reflecting the jury's belief that the evidence presented had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Jennifer and her co-conspirators were guilty. Following the verdict, Jennifer Pan was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in Canada. Her co-defendants received similar sentences, ensuring that all involved would spend decades behind bars. The sentencing marked the end of a long and painful ordeal for the Pan family, but the emotional scars left by the crime would endure. For Hui Pan and his son Felix, the loss of their wife and mother, coupled with the betrayal by their daughter and sister, was a tragedy from which they would never fully recover. The Jennifer Pan case captivated both the public and the media, not just in Canada but internationally. The shocking nature of the crime, coupled with the psychological complexities involved, sparked widespread discussion about the pressures of parental expectations and the potential for psychological manipulation in criminal investigations. The case also led to debates about the interrogation techniques used, with some critics arguing that the methods employed by the police had been overly coercive and could lead to false confessions. Despite these debates, many viewed the outcome as a clear case of justice being served, given the weight of the evidence against Jennifer and her co-conspirators. The interrogation of Jennifer Pan stands as a profound example of how law enforcement can strategically use psychological techniques to break down a suspect's defenses and extract a confession. The detective's approach was meticulously calculated, designed to erode Jennifer's mental and emotional fortitude over time. At the core of the detective's strategy was the read technique, a widely recognized interrogation method that hinges on psychological manipulation. The technique unfolds in three main stages: fact analysis, a behavior analysis interview, and the 9-step interrogation process. In Jennifer's case, these stages were used to manipulate her perception of reality and gradually lead her toward confession. The detectives began by closely observing Jennifer's behavior, noting her body language, inconsistencies in her story, and emotional responses. These observations allowed them to tailor their approach, exploiting her vulnerabilities. Jennifer was kept isolated, which heightened her sense of vulnerability and made her more susceptible to the detective's tactics. Initially, they built rapport, using calm and empathetic tones to create a false sense of security, making Jennifer feel understood and supported. This approach was critical in lowering her defenses, as she began to see the detectives as allies rather than adversaries. As the interrogation progressed, the detectives introduced a mix of real and fabricated evidence, designed to trap Jennifer psychologically. They suggested they had forensic proof and witness testimony that pointed to her guilt, even when such evidence did not exist. This strategy aimed to make Jennifer believe that denial was futile, pushing her closer to confession. The psychological impact of being presented with seemingly insurmountable evidence created a scenario where Jennifer felt cornered, with confession appearing as her only escape. The good cop, bad cop tactic further disoriented Jennifer. The alternating approaches, one detective being sympathetic while the other was confrontational, played on her emotions, making her more likely to confide in the good cop, who seemed to offer a way out. This tactic heightened Jennifer's emotional instability, making her more susceptible to manipulation. The prolonged nature of the interrogation, coupled with the relentless psychological strategies, had a profound effect on Jennifer's mental state. As the hours passed, her ability to maintain her fabricated story deteriorated. The combination of fatigue, cognitive overload, and the overwhelming pressure of the supposed evidence led to an emotional breakdown. Jennifer's initial composure began to crumble under the weight of the detective's tactics. Fatigue set in, making it increasingly difficult for her to keep track of her lies. The psychological pressure induced a state of desperation, where confession began to seem like a relief rather than an admission of guilt. The interrogation had successfully dismantled her psychological defenses, leading her to the point where she felt that confessing was her only viable option. The effectiveness of the interrogation techniques used on Jennifer Pan is evident in how they systematically dismantled her initial narrative and led her to confess. The cumulative psychological pressure, ranging from isolation to the strategic presentation of evidence, played a pivotal role in her decision to admit her involvement in the crime. The isolation Jennifer experienced during the interrogation was a critical factor in her eventual confession. Deprived of external support, she was left to face the detective's pressure alone. The fear instilled by the fabricated evidence created a scenario where Jennifer saw no escape other than confession. The detective's ability to exploit her emotional state, her fear, guilt, and desperation, was key in breaking down her resistance. For Jennifer, the confession became a form of release from the psychological and emotional burden she had been carrying. The intense pressure made maintaining her lies unbearable, and the act of confessing offered a way out. This sense of relief is a common outcome in high-pressure interrogations, where suspects often confess to escape the stress, even if they are not fully aware of the long-term consequences of their admission. To fully comprehend the crime, it is essential to explore the complex motives that drove Jennifer Pan to orchestrate such a heinous act. Her actions were not the result of a single factor, but rather the culmination of a lifetime of pressure, personal dissatisfaction, and a deeply ingrained pattern of deception. Jennifer Pan grew up in a household where success was not just encouraged but demanded. Her parents, Big Ha and Hui Pan, were Vietnamese immigrants who had worked tirelessly to build a better life for their children. This background set the stage for a family dynamic dominated by tiger parenting, characterized by authoritarian control, high expectations, and little tolerance for failure. From a young age, Jennifer was pushed to excel academically and adhere to her parents' strict rules. The relentless pursuit of perfection left her with little room for personal freedom, and the fear of disappointing her parents became a central theme in her life. Unable to meet their expectations, Jennifer began living a double life, fabricating stories about her academic success to maintain the image of the perfect daughter. This double life only added to the pressure she felt, as each lie required more deception to sustain it, trapping her in an increasingly desperate situation. Jennifer's personal dissatisfaction also played a significant role in her actions. Despite her outward appearance of success, she was deeply unhappy and felt trapped by her parents' strict control over her life. Her desire for independence and control over her own destiny became a driving force behind her decision to commit the crime. Jennifer longed for financial and emotional freedom, which she believed she could only achieve by eliminating her parents. She saw their deaths as a way to inherit their wealth and finally escape the suffocating environment they had created. Her relationship with Daniel Wong, who provided the emotional support she lacked at home, further fueled her desire to break free. The prospect of living a life free from her parents' control, with Daniel by her side, became a powerful motivator for her actions. Deception was a central theme in Jennifer Pan's life, both before and during the planning of the crime. Her ability to deceive those around her, her parents, friends, and eventually the police, was a key factor in executing her plan. Over the years, Jennifer had become adept at lying, using deception as a survival strategy to avoid the wrath of her parents and maintain the image they expected of her. In planning the crime, Jennifer used deception to manipulate those around her, including her accomplices. She presented the murder as a solution to her problems, offering financial incentives to those who agreed to help her. Her ultimate deception was staging the crime as a home invasion gone wrong, hoping to divert suspicion away from herself. However, this facade ultimately unraveled during the police investigation, leading to her confession and conviction. The Jennifer Pan case also sheds light on broader social and cultural issues, particularly the pressures faced by children of immigrant families and the challenges of navigating conflicting cultural expectations. The high expectations placed on Jennifer by her parents had far-reaching consequences, not only for her but for the entire Pan family. The psychological impact of these expectations was profound, leading Jennifer to a life of deception and eventually to commit a crime that would destroy her family. The strict and authoritarian parenting style of Big Ha and Hui Pan created a family dynamic where open communication and emotional support were lacking. This environment fostered a sense of isolation in Jennifer, as she felt unable to express her true feelings or seek help. The lack of emotional connection within the family contributed to the breakdown of relationships and the eventual tragedy. Jennifer's younger brother, Felix, was also deeply affected by the crime. Although he was not directly involved, the loss of his parents and the betrayal by his sister left him with emotional scars that would last a lifetime. Felix's life was forever altered by the crime, as he struggled to navigate the aftermath and the intense media scrutiny that followed. The crime had a profound impact on the broader community as well. The revelation that a seemingly successful and obedient daughter could orchestrate such a brutal act shocked many and raised questions about the hidden pressures faced by children in similar situations. The case sparked discussions about the need for mental health support and open communication within families, particularly those dealing with the challenges of balancing cultural expectations with individual aspirations. The Jennifer Pan case stands as a sobering reminder of the complex interplay between psychological pressure, familial expectations, and the darker facets of human behavior. As the case draws to a close, it presents not only the final chapter of a harrowing narrative, but also an opportunity to reflect on the broader implications for criminal justice, family dynamics, and societal expectations. Jennifer Pan's interrogation was a pivotal element in unraveling the truth behind the crime. The detectives employed a range of psychological strategies, from prolonged questioning to the presentation of fabricated evidence, ultimately leading to Jennifer's emotional breakdown and confession. This process revealed the delicate balance law enforcement must maintain between effective interrogation and ethical practice. Jennifer's confession was a critical turning point, providing the prosecution with the evidence needed to secure her conviction. It laid bare the extent of her premeditated actions, driven by years of psychological and emotional pressure. Jennifer's motives were multifaceted, rooted in a toxic blend of intense familial pressure, personal dissatisfaction, and a desperate need for control over her life. Her parents' high expectations, coupled with a lack of emotional support, left her feeling trapped. The financial incentive of inheriting her parents' wealth, along with the desire for independence, pushed her toward the drastic decision to orchestrate their murder. Her relationship with Daniel Wong also played a crucial role, as it provided her with emotional support outside her family's rigid control. The techniques used in Jennifer's interrogation raised significant ethical questions about the role of psychological manipulation in law enforcement. While these methods proved effective in eliciting a confession, they also highlight the potential for coercion and the risk of false confessions. The use of fabricated evidence and psychological pressure can impair a suspect's ability to make rational decisions, especially under extreme stress. This case underscores the need for safeguards within the criminal justice system to protect against overly coercive interrogation practices that might compromise the integrity of confessions. The Jennifer Pan case serves as a stark warning about the potential consequences of intense familial pressure. The Pan family's high standards intended to drive Jennifer toward success, instead fostered an environment of fear, deception, and ultimately, violence. This case highlights the psychological damage that can result from unrelenting pressure to meet parental expectations. It emphasizes the importance of a balanced approach to parenting, one that fosters open communication, emotional support, and recognition of individual limitations and aspirations. Deception was at the heart of Jennifer's life, playing a pivotal role in her interactions with her parents and in the execution of the crime. The breakdown of trust within the Pan family was a key factor in the tragedy. Jennifer's inability to be honest about her struggles created a sense of isolation and desperation, driving her to commit a heinous act. This case underscores the importance of trust and open communication in family relationships, highlighting how a lack of these elements can lead to devastating consequences. The case also touches on the broader social and cultural issues faced by children of immigrant families. Caught between their parents' traditional values and the individualistic culture of the society they live in, these children often face significant stress and identity conflicts. The Pan family's emphasis on academic and professional success, rooted in their immigrant experience, placed immense pressure on Jennifer. This case sheds light on the challenges of balancing cultural expectations with personal aspirations, particularly in immigrant families. The Jennifer Pan case left indelible scars on the Pan family, particularly on her surviving father, Hui Pan, and her brother, Felix Pan. The loss of their wife and mother, coupled with the betrayal by Jennifer, created a rift that could never fully heal. The public and media reaction to the case was intense, sparking widespread discussion about the pressures faced by children in high-expectation environments, the ethics of interrogation practices, and the psychological factors that drive individuals to commit such extreme acts. This case offers significant lessons for the criminal justice system, highlighting the importance of ethical interrogation practices that respect the rights and mental health of suspects while still enabling law enforcement to gather necessary evidence. It also underscores the need for greater awareness and understanding of the psychological and emotional factors that can lead individuals to commit crimes. Addressing these factors, through both preventive measures and supportive interventions, is crucial in preventing similar tragedies in the future. In conclusion, the Jennifer Pan case serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of human behavior and the far-reaching consequences of unchecked psychological pressure. It calls for a deeper examination of the ways in which society, families, and the criminal justice system can better support individuals in distress, ultimately striving to prevent such tragedies from occurring again. If you've made it this far, please drop a comment saying, "Done," and we'll make sure to personally thank you for your incredible support. Thank you for tuning in to our deep dive into the fatal expectations, the shocking Jennifer Pan case. We hope this episode intrigued and challenged you as much as it did us in the making. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This way you won't miss any future updates. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you believe justice was served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're eager to see what you think. For those interested in delving deeper, we've provided Amazon affiliate links in the description to the books we referenced during our research. Purchasing through these links won't cost you anything extra, but it helps support our channel. And if you're craving even more content, consider joining our Patreon community. There, you'll gain access to thousands of pages of news articles, 10 hours long interrogation video, and you can purchase the entire set of images featured in this episode through our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.